OTB Sports Radio.
Now we're welcome back. It's the Drive for Five special. It's actually harder to say than you would think. The Drive for Five special taking over OTB Sports Radio with thanks to Tech7. Simply tech it and leave it. Professor Paul Rouse is coming to the studio. Hello.
Hey Joe, how are you?
Very well. We were just saying goodbye there to Brian McMahon. I would say an impressive sort.
How do you follow that? Brian McMahon is, in so many different facets of his life, is hugely impressive. I mean, intellectually, he's
frightening.
Yeah, he's frightening. Yeah, he's absolutely. He's so erudite. His range of skills, and he didn't tell you about it, but he might tell you about it again. When he was in Harvard in the 60s, he went to see Muhammad Ali speak in Harvard. Himself and his wife went to see Muhammad Ali, and he just describes how he saw him how he held a room of law students in the palm of his hand, and so like there's so many different aspects to his life and his career.
Yeah. Was this Ali speaking tour Vietnam years?
Yeah, it must have been, judging by
because he went in 60s.
Yes, and the timings are in it. Ali was probably out of boxing at that stage and making money. Yeah.
No, very impressive. Anyway.
Just to lower the tone a bit.
Best of luck, kiddo. So, look, we'll get into various bits and bobs. Obviously, people are very familiar with the historical slant you bring when you come in and talk about various things, and it's All-Ireland Football Week, so we'll look back on All-Ireland Football finals. Just a point on the general air this week and the build-up to it. Not seeing many flags around Dublin.
Yeah, what match? What match are you talking about?
Kieran Donaghy, we played a clip earlier on. He was talking to the lads and he was saying that he was driving around Kerry and he was saying, come on, where's the buzz? Where are the flags? And, you know, he's going on at people to get flags up, and he got back to his house and realised, oh, we don't have a flag up either, you know. So there's, it's not like kind of hype, crazy anticipation kind of a vibe. I don't know how you'd class it.
So I think it's flat. I think there are conversations about it, but you could not say that it's dominating the airwaves. I know you've got your special today, but you cannot say that it is all over the newspapers and all over the radio and all over television.
Yeah.
You cannot say that in this city, like I compare it to 2011, when there were flags all over Dublin City. They were back in the final. It was Kerry, and there was a kind of a sense of optimism and genuine engagement with it. And it's just not there this time.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
Because there was novelty, obviously, in 2011, but there should be novelty for the 5 in a row. Like, there should be cars painted. There should be cattle sprayed in colours. There should be all of that pageantry that goes with it. All of the stuff that Brian McMahon was talking about. Kind of half the fun of the whole thing is the build-up.
It's flat. Yeah. And it has been flat all year. And it has, I think last year was really flat as well. The Tyrone final, and I was in Tyrone before the final, in a club up in Tyrone beforehand, and there was a big event in Omagh, in Sally's in Omagh, up there, and everybody up there was talking about how flat it was up there too.
Yeah.
And they hadn't been in an All-Ireland final since 2008.
Yeah.
So I think last year there was a sense of inevitability around Dublin. Now, I don't think that's there this year. I think it's there possibly, but I don't think that's it. And I don't think it's just the fact that it's in August that we're running. I know the final will ultimately be played into September, but I don't think it's just the fact that it's been shifted forward 3 weeks. Because after all, there have been counties who have reached All-Ireland hurling and football semi-finals who've been ablaze with flags, and there's been a huge thing about it.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to put your finger on it, exactly why that is. And I suspect that the game has yet to capture the wider public imagination, which is usually what drives, say, businesses to put up flags. And in terms then of the Dublin GAA community, I suspect that amongst some there may be a suggestion that yes, we are inevitably moving to 5, and for others there may be just an enormous fear of losing to Kerry in this final. And down in Kerry, I think there is huge pressure in Kerry to stop this 5 in a row. I think there's huge, and I think there's a little bit of fear there. And I think it also goes back to a couple of years ago when there was that this Dublin-Kerry semi-final, when, you know, it was as if, you know, the future of civilization in the county depended on derailing Dublin.
Yeah.
And every Kerry person who was down in Kerry before that game, and every Kerry person you talked to before that semi-final, was saying, when you asked them, were Kerry going to win? And they would all say yes. but they said it in a tone and in a pitch that suggested they were trying to convince themselves as well. So I think they were burned by that a couple of years ago, and I think the desire to beat Dublin and to stop the 5 is so immense that it's on the verge of being overwhelming. And at the same time, they have a young and potentially quite brilliant team coming, and so they want to believe in them. And I think there's a lot of people will give Kerry a real chance, and a lot of people equally who will say that Dublin, it's inevitably Dublin's.
Yeah.
But either way, for whatever reason we may decide that it's but it's flat.
In theory, yeah. It's probably 2 years early for this Kerry team to be under that pressure. But
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, great teams, like every empire ends. We know that from history. Yeah. Every empire inevitably ends in dust.
Do those empires tend to put in 12 minutes of devastating football against Mayo just before they end?
Just before sitting back to watch Rome burning.
That didn't happen.
It's not. But again, this is how you read it. Do you watch the first half of that game against Mayo, and do you watch the first half of the Meath game, and you think, oh yeah, I have a bit of a chance here? Or do you watch those 12 minutes against Mayo and all of those other 12 minutes where Dublin have put on the afterburners and blown away a team?
Yeah. I watched the first half of the Mayo Dublin match and thought they really have a chance here, a really good chance, and they're keeping the ball.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was in the stadium, and maybe I was hoping, as Mayo parents, and we're sitting there and like, this is all going very well, and look at them, they're keeping the ball. Dublin are getting a bit frustrated. Suddenly, as we're into knockout football and the clock keeps ticking, then the potential loss of a 5 in a row becomes another extra burden for them as the match goes on. I thought, this is interesting. Andy Moore going to come from the bench, We didn't see the 12 minutes of the second half coming, that's for sure. We thought we were going to be at the hour mark here and be within 3-4 points, one way or another.
Yeah. The 5 minutes before half-time were really hard on Mayo. If they'd got another score, instead they didn't, they got pulled backwards. And I think that was, apart from anything else, it's set, and then the point just after half-time, and then it's
yeah, there was a worry that 2 points at half-time was the minimum lead they could have had, the minimum return.
And then really, with the amount of ball they had, it really needed to be much more, but it came back to that same conversation with Mayo. But I will tell you one thing, if Mayo were in the final this weekend, there'd be a lot more hype about it.
True, correct. Where do we want to start as we kind of reflect on the All-Ireland Football Final week, All-Ireland Football Finals, and put them into context? Do you want to start pre-1884, as you sometimes do?
Well, we can talk about how the idea of what is Gaelic football even itself, like where does it come from, if you want to. And is there such a thing as Gaelic football that goes back before 1884? And the answer, of course, is there isn't. Okay. The idea that Gaelic football it is basically the case that Gaelic football was invented by Maurice Davin, who was charged at the meeting of the GAA on the 27th of December 1884 with writing a set of rules for hurling, Gaelic football and athletics. And he constructed the rules of a game in the most broadest sense possible, which he unveiled at a meeting and was passed at the 17th of January 1885. And the first game was played 3-4 weeks later in Callan, County Kilkenny, which ended in a scoreless draw between Kilkenny and Callan, and partly that
the blanket defence.
Blanket defence. Well, it was. You have to think about the rules of the game he constructed. Teams should have up to 21 players on the field. The field was 160 yards long. It'll be shorter than we have now, 80 yards wide. And the rules that he sketched out were fairly limited in terms of, it's not clear whether it was a carrying game or whether it was a kicking game. How did you move the ball? It didn't really define a tackle, and we've kind of struggled to get around to that ever since, but it didn't. What it did say was you couldn't push someone from behind, or you couldn't pull someone from behind, or you couldn't headbutt anyone. So they were the three basic lines in all of this. Yeah. And the other rule and the other thing about the playing, well, there are two other things. It set up the scoring area, and the scoring area is the soccer goals. So the first games of Gaelic football were played with either end of the field was a soccer goals. Right. And you scored by scoring more goals, if you could score at all, than the opposition team, which when there are 21 players on each team is a considerable challenge in long grass with a heavy ball. Most games played in winter rather than summer. It was considered at the time that Gaelic games were appropriate to the winter rather than to the summer ones.
This didn't sound like a very good sport.
But all football games at the time were, broadly speaking, extremely physical, not very open, and not the greatest spectacles you've ever seen. And what's interesting is the GAA drew on soccer rules to pick it. So Morris Davin, there was a throw in the opposition. So you kick the ball out over the line, and I throw it in for our team afterwards. Right. So this is there. And in those initial games, one of the practices which was permitted was that if two players so decide, they can break off to the side and engage in wrestling, or handy grips, as they called it.
Fix it like men.
Fix it like men, and that was only banned in 1886, but no, news of it has yet to reach certain sections of the association. But it's something that was permitted in those early rules, and
so you could go off, have a
wrestling match,
sort it out like men, and then come back and rejoin the game.
I mean, there was an acceptable level of violence within the wrestling.
You couldn't kill anyone,
but it was understood to be something that could take place as the game played on around you. On the field. And these games, all the stories from these initial games are of really physical contests.
No kidding.
And there are a couple of reasons for this as well. First of all, there's this celebration of kind of power culture. Everyone knows who the hard man in the area is.
Yeah.
There's actually a priest from Kerry, Father J.P. Devan, who went away to America after being at a match between Castle Island and Tralee, or in the Tralee sports field in 1887. He went away to America and he wrote about it 50 years later.
Okay.
And he couldn't remember. He just couldn't remember who won the match. But he could remember Foxy Tom throwing three lads out over the ropes in a heap in a display of power. So the second point in this is there was an issue with refereeing. As in, there was no tradition of refereeing in football games that were played before 1882. And it would appear that the New Gaels found it somewhat difficult to accept that somebody should restrain them in their actions on the field. And so for example, there was a football match in Kilkenny, and Kilkenny was then a football county much more than it was a hurling county. There was a match between Sleebrue and Ballyhale in 1886, and all entreaties from the referee for the players to stop brawling, was essentially a faction fight, were rejected, and the only way it was stopped was when the county board went in and pulled up the goalposts. It was the only way they could get the match to end. In a match here on the outskirts of Dublin, up past Ballyboden, a referee was headbutted, so you weren't allowed headbutt on the field unless it was a referee, clearly. And there were various assaults on referees, and generally the referee was ignored.
Yeah. Wow.
The first historian of the GAA, T.F. O'Sullivan, wrote that it was difficult for Gaels to accept the referee, and his person was by no means sacrosanct.
I'm sure. And when did we get to something anyway approaching what we would have seen in the modern era? Like, did it take 10, 20 years to get this thing shaped?
It began actually pretty quickly.
Okay.
So you could not have a consideration where you could not have scoreless draws week after week. So they introduced what they called points posts. So like in Australian rules, you had middle posts in the goals, except they were soccer style.
Yeah.
And on the outside, you had points posts. Right. So you kick a ball in, this is introduced in 1886, and you kick a ball in either side of the goal frame, and inside the outside post you get 1 point for it.
Okay.
But until 1892, a goal was worth more than any number of points. So
if I score 50 points, you score a goal.
We're using my devastating pace, rip through your defence, head up the field, and stitch a goal.
You win by 51 points to 50.
Yes.
Well, that's crap.
Well, they went with that until the 1891 All-Ireland final.
But does that a level of jeopardy, though? You have a puncher's chance at all times.
You do, absolutely.
Right.
But 1891 All-Ireland final, Young Ireland's were playing the Cork champions, whose name I can't remember, in the All-Ireland final. And in the first half, they scored 2 goals and a point. So they got 2-1 to no score up.
Yeah.
And the Dublin captain, John Kennedy, got every member of his team back inside the square. Just lads, we're ringing the goal here. There's a ring of steel here. This is puke football, Dublin style, 1892. and they played it. And after that, the rules were changed to say a goal was worth 5 points, and then a couple of years later, a goal went to being worth 3 points.
Yeah.
So that opened out the game. It meant you could shoot from a little bit further out. The equipment improved, so the really heavy footballs of those earlier years, which were poorly stitched, gave way to manufactured footballs with proper rubbers, properly sewn. And it's actually one of those interesting things about the origins of modern sport. You have to think about the role of technology.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So the introduction of the rubber ball and that kind of standardised play allowed for the creation of the English Football League and various other games to have a proper calendar of play rather than waiting for someone to make one out of a pig's bladder and stitch it up. So there is a ready supply of manufactured goods. So that plays. Teams, they reduce in number from 21 first of all down to 19 and then 17, and then ultimately in 1913 they went down to 15 players.
Okay.
So the story, I think, of every single sport is threefold in terms of how the rules are organised, and this is absolutely a case for the GAA. They try and open out the play. So rules are introduced to try and get you to spread out a little bit, to make the play faster and more open, both for the player and for those who gather to watch it, so you can see what's going on. And number two, they try and make the rules relatively easy to understand. Now there's a limited achievement in that. You can think of sports off the top of your head where that just isn't the case.
Yeah.
And number three, they try and make it more easy to referee. And that there are the three basic ambitions, I think, in all these sports. And, well, I suppose the fourth one is they try to make it less violent.
Yeah. And when does the posts, as we know them, come in and we lose this Australian rules thing?
So that's in the middle of the 1900s, and into the middle of the first decade of the 20th century. And by 1911, it's normal kind of H-style rugby posts.
So around World War I time, we're getting pretty close to the product.
You're getting very close to it by about 1903, 1904, 1905, because you have teams are wearing jerseys. They're not just playing in their working clothes. They're not just wearing boots or playing barefooted. They're wearing proper games. Fields are being lined out. The very best fields are being marked out. Teams are training a little bit. They're travelling to matches and trains. Train companies are sponsoring teams to go. They're putting on match specials.
Yeah, there's an economy around it.
Grounds are being built games are being played in stadia where people can be charged in. So it's no longer a case where you're not playing an All-Ireland final in the Phoenix Park anymore.
Okay.
You're playing it in a ground where people can be charged in.
Is that where All-Ireland finals were played?
There was an All-Ireland final, a hurling final played in the Phoenix Park, and the grass was too long. It was a disaster.
Wow.
The first final was in Burren in hurling, and the first final of football was played out. People might be familiar if you go out to Stillorgan Dual Carriage, when you go to Donnybrook, and there's a Donnybrook bus garage. Just in behind that is where the first All-Ireland football final was played. There's a local plaque set up to the fields in there.
When did Croke Park come into its own?
Croke Park, there was an All-Ireland final played there in the middle of the 1890s, but at that stage Croke Park was a ground that was used for the racing of horses, for soccer matches. It was used for every sort of sporting event. But the GAA purchased it from Frank Deneen, who was then a leading official, and by 1913 it's been called
Croke Park.
It's Croke Park, and it's got its terraces built around, including, of course, Hill 16, which was built from the rubble of the 1916 Rising and opened in 1915, which is one of the great achievements.
They kept that going for a long time, though, didn't they?
Oh, if you get the right tour guide, you can still hear it. And the fact that the O'Reilly's car is in the rubble and all of these things. So, the martyred blood is a fairly potent
sure it is.
thing to have under your feet.
You jot down, I could be wrong here, so correct me if I am wrong, if we're talking about the great teams, the context for this champion Dublin 5 in a row. Wexford, are they kind of the first great team?
Oh, the first great team is Wexford.
Okay.
There are great teams. Dublin had a 3-in-a-row winning team from the end of the 1890s, and Dublin won kind of 6 All-Irelands in about 10 years. So Dublin had a really good team at that stage, mainly filled with country people living in the city. And indeed, one of those teams that won an All-Ireland was Bray Emmets, who were playing in the Dublin Championship. So it's often said Wicklow has never won a provincial championship, and of course strictly that's right, but a club team from Wicklow playing for Dublin won the All-Ireland in the early period. But the first... And Kerry won a hurling All-Ireland before it won a football, in the same way as Kilkenny won Leinster football championships before winning hurling. But there was a flip there, and Kilkenny drifted out of football in the early years of the 20th century and became more hurling county, whereas Kerry took off as a footballing county and began to produce brilliant teams in the early 1900s, where they did a series of magnificent matches with Kildare and with Louth and various other counties. But the Wexford team that came along in 1913 and 1914 was a superb team, won 2 Leinster championships and got to All-Ireland finals where they were beaten by Kerry. And that Kerry team of Dick Fitzgerald. And Dick Fitzgerald, we have to stop and talk about Dick Fitzgerald for a second, because Dick Fitzgerald is one of the great iconic figures of Gaelic football, who wrote the first manual on how to play the game called How to Play Gaelic Football, which was put out in 1914. And the game that he talked about was a game in which you practice your skills.
Okay.
A game in which he said it was a much better game, the most scientific of all football games played in the world, because unlike soccer or unlike rugby, in his view, the balance of the fact that there were different ways to score meant that you couldn't be fluked out of the game. So you couldn't concede an early game goal in Gaelic football as you could in soccer, then bring everyone back and hold on. Just couldn't do it, because you did that, someone will pick you off with points. So the idea was that he was like a true star of the game. But his team of 13-14 was then taken on by Wexford, like an extraordinary football team who won the first 4 in a row. 1915, 16, 17 and 18. And in going for 5 in a row, they were beaten by Dublin in the Leinster semi-final of 1919. Competition were being delayed at that stage, so it's into 1920, and the team it's got old at this stage, and the ravages of war and putting it together, and just a sheer challenge for amateur officials, let alone the players, but amateur officials, to keep a show on the road is too much. It overwhelmed them, but they were a brilliant football team. And interestingly, they won their 4 All-Irelands without their best forward, a man called James Rossiter. James Rossiter scored the winning goal for them in the Leinster final of 1914. He scored goal after goal in matches in that year. James Rossiter died the week before they won the All-Ireland in 1915. He was serving with the British Army in France when he was killed. And he is one of a huge number of GAA people who fought for the British Army in those years, but his is a particularly poignant story, given how loved he was in the county of Wexford and what a blow it was to that county. And that Wexford team was filled with Republicans, people who were involved in the idea of the 1916 Rising. Like, it's in Enniscorthy is the only town really outside Dublin which rose in 1916, and there were people around the New Ross Geraldines and people like that who were supportive of that rebellion and were deeply involved in 1921. So it was a Republican, or a really strong Republican county, but it also had that other presence.
Right, okay. So where do you want to segue after that? Like, Kerry in the 30s had a great team, didn't they? Yeah,
Kerry 1929 to 1932. Kerry had just come out of a couple of defeats. Kildare were the great team of 127, 128.
That's the last time.
Yeah, and it's actually quite striking and startling that it is the last time when you consider, because Kildare were such a prominent force in the modernisation of Gaelic football. Like, for example, the Kildare team that played Kerry in the really famous finals at the beginning of the century. They were stars. They didn't just have white jerseys and white shorts. They even they dyed their boots white to appear out. I mean, we're seeing something here, Joe, but out they come in their stars, and of course they have a great rivalry with Kerry, and in 27 and 28, Kildare too much for Kerry.
And can we pause for a moment to acknowledge that all white jerseys are deadly? They just look class. Real Madrid, Leeds, Kildare. There's just something about an all-white jersey.
I'm more of a green, white and gold person for local reasons.
Fair enough. I think all white is magical looking.
Yeah.
Grand. That's my contribution over. We'll get back to Kerry.
So Kerry come back in 29. Kildare going for 3 in a row, and Kerry take them on in the final.
Okay.
And Joe Barrett, the former Republican from the anti-treaty side in the Civil War is captain of the team, and on that team are also people who fought for the treaty side. So there's pro-treaty and anti-treaty in the dressing room. Now there's a whole story.
I'm sure.
I don't know if you asked Brian McMahon about this when he was in, but there's a whole, almost like a mythology in Kerry about how that football team healed the Civil War split. These football teams of the 20s were, and it is true that they shared a team from early on, 23, 24, they began to share teams, and there was a willingness to field for the greater good of Kerry, and that shouldn't be denied. But there is an illusion that there was a friendship inevitable around that, and there were individuals who got on fine. That's totally true, and that was the case. But there are also first-hand testimonies from the time that it was deeply uncomfortable.
I'm sure.
In certain issues, and that in many instances that there were pro-treaty people who came togged out to matches, and so they didn't dress with them, and that everything was forgotten on the field, but it was on the field that it was forgotten. That there was
an extraordinary backdrop, isn't it?
It is an extraordinary backdrop, and it's one that we would do well to remember.
Yeah, I never hear that mentioned when that Kerry team of the 30s are mentioned.
No, and they were a brilliant team.
Right.
So 29, 30, 31, 32. There's a newspaper report. Richard McElligott, historian who's written an excellent history of the first 50 years of the GAA in Kerry, talks about these newspaper reports, which talk about Kerry's victory in 32, and they say, they're ruining Gaelic football. They're never going to be beaten again. And it talks about how Kerry's preeminence is now a huge problem for the GAA. And then they win next year's Munster Championship in the Canter, and they're to play Cavan in the All-Ireland semi-final. And for some reason, the game is played in Cavan. And it's a low-scoring game, and Kerry are done by a late goal. You'll see there's a bit of a pattern here, and will emerge later. But so they lose to Cavan, as I say, by a late goal, and these world champions, as they were fated in San Francisco and New York the previous year when they went on their exhibition tour, are gone, and it's the breakup of the team.
Right. When is the next great team, or when's the next remarkable individual or achievement that you want to hit on as well?
It's tricky, right? It's tricky because if we're setting the bar here at 4 in a row.
Yeah.
So you have to now jump from the 30s to the 70s across some extraordinary teams.
Okay.
In doing that, we'll take a sidestep into hurling slightly for a second, because Cork won 4 All-Irelands in a row in hurling in the 1940s, and one of their great players was Jack Lynch, later to be Taoiseach.
Yeah.
And Lynch won a football, so they won 41 to 44 in the hurling. 45 they won the football, which Lynch played on. 46 they came back to win the hurling again. So Lynch won 6 All-Irelands in 6 years back to back.
Wow.
So we have to note him.
Was he a politician then?
Yes, no, he wasn't. He became a politician after that. It probably did his electoral chances no harm.
Sure.
And he was elected, and away he goes. And
would he have been one of the first GAA people who became a high-profile politician?
There are GAA people who stood for election and were successful in an election who played in the 1880s.
Okay, so it's always a thing.
It's not necessarily. And by the way, there are many GAA people who have stood for election and failed. So there are no guarantees of success in this. So there were great teams. The Roscommon team in the 40s. Brilliant team, really loved team. The Mayo team in the early 50s, beloved team as well.
What did the Roscommon team win?
They won 2 All-Irelands, which in the middle of a war, from a very small county, having not won one. And they were, again, fated, absolutely fated for their achievements. And actually in the middle, what happened in the 40s was really interesting, because Carlow won a Leinster Championship at that stage. So there were counties just kind of made a bit of a burst. Antrim came back a little bit at that time. So, and you go on through, and I mean, I'm going to leave out some really good teams here by doing this, but you had the Galway 3 in a row team of the 60s, again an excellent football team filled with really remarkable players. The Down team that became the first team from north of the border to win the All-Ireland when they robbed Offaly in probably shouldn't really say that, should I?
That Down team is legendary.
Yeah, and filled with outstanding footballers. Absolutely outstanding. Someone like Sean O'Neill. Sean O'Neill is spoken, the way Conor Callaghan now is spoken about, every bit as much of that is what was said about Sean O'Neill at the time. Joe Lennon, who went on to write books on coaching and on fitness training, was also involved in as a brilliant footballer in that team, and so on, like McCartan, so on, throughout. Every single line in that team had celebrated players in it.
We had Brian McMahon in, and he was remembering the Kerry Armagh final of 53.
Yes.
60s is quite late for a Northern Irish team to win in All-Ireland, isn't it?
It is, and it was a team. It's really interesting what happened. It's also a product of the fact that the county boards were later to organise in the north than they were in Ulster than they were in other provinces. So, for example, it's really only in the 1920s that Donegal was a properly organised, functioning county board and running proper competitions year after year. And getting themselves going. It's not to say, like, Cavan were utterly dominant, and all the Ulster championships that Cavan won before the 1970s puts them so far ahead in the Roll of Honour that the rest of them are way in the distance. But I think it matters here, though, that we pause and say this, that unlike hurling, Gaelic football now extended properly across every county in the country.
Why didn't hurling extend?
The challenges of money, first of all. You only need a round thing to play football. The cost of hurleys, the cost of footballs. Number two, the technical difficulties in spreading the game. Hurling is a much more technically demanding game than football. To argue otherwise just doesn't hold water. And three, before the 1970s, in general in the GAA, there's a huge resistance to coaching. Huge resistance to it. And the idea that there should be coaching is something that some people just believed it to be alien to the game and promotive of a source of professionalisation.
Okay.
So there shouldn't be coaching courses. There shouldn't be full-time coaching officers. There was no need for that. But how would you spread a game like hurling unless you can put people into the air? So what you were reliant on was somebody moving to a particular area who came from a thing and had it. They were almost like disciples.
So there was a randomness.
They're proselytizing for the game.
There's a randomness to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unless you were one of those areas which had established itself in the first 30 or 40 years of the GAA. But again, football became the game. And it is the game. Football is the popular game.
Are you veering towards saying the better game here?
Oh no, I'm not. I don't believe in better games.
Okay,
I don't believe in that
I thought you were building up to that revelation here at 20-4 in the afternoon, All Ireland final week.
No, I don't think. I know there are. I don't like the binary argument on this because there are hurling people who talk about football only to deride it, and there are football people who just are not interested in hurling really to some extent. They'll watch it, but they're not bothered about it. And the idea that you should rub the two games against each other, like, you're not going to achieve anything.
No, it's very true. We are here with Paul Rouse, and it's our Drive for 5 special, thanks to Tech 7, simply tech it and leave it. So we were in the midst there of bypassing several teams. We touched on down 60s, which led into that hurling chat. So is there anything more you want to say about the down 60s or the hurling?
There is something I want to say about how teams trained. Before we're going to have to move on to Kerry in the 70s, I suppose, at some point. But how did teams train? So there's this notion that training is a modern thing. So coaching is a modern thing in large measure in its acceptance and certainly its professionalisation.
Yeah.
But teams have trained from all through the 20th century. Teams became more scientific, more systematic in their training. Diet mattered.
Yeah.
Nutrition more broadly, although not called that, mattered. And teams went into camp. So by the 1940s, teams are going into training camps for 2 weeks before All-Ireland finals. And then by then they're going in for weeks before any big game into a different place. But this was happening back as far as the 1910s.
And is there evidence of people saying this is too much to ask amateurs?
So what happened was it was decided by Congress in 1950. So the great Kerry trainer at the time was Eamon O'Sullivan.
Yeah, he feels like the famous architect.
Like he trained Kerry basically to 8 All-Irelands in the years between the 20s and the 60s. It was involved in Kerry 8 of those teams.
Yeah, we had Wishy Fogarty on one day down in Killarney talking to us about him, because we worked in the hospital.
In the hospital,
pitch, yeah. And he was saying that O'Sullivan almost not pioneered, but had learned, was one of the early subscribers to occupational therapy. So the patients had contributed to building the stadium in Killarney for their own mental health, and the added benefit of Killarney having this lovely stadium.
Yes.
An amazing thing, really.
And he drew on his training as a physician to prepare the Kerry team.
Okay.
And he was an absolute advocate for this week or 2 weeks, this 24-hour control of someone's life, so that you could feed them, you could train them, you could relax them, and you could rest them. So they were the 4 pillars that he put on, and while he would develop their skills, and it was a rigid grid-based system. So there's 15 on a team. There's your quadrant.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And you will win that.
That's not very pioneering. That's a bit Brian Cody-esque.
I hope we were very, very slow to dismiss Brian Cody tactical.
But win your battle.
Win your battle, absolutely. He developed this, and he wrote this in a book which was published in 1958 called The Art and Science of Gaelic Football, still available. Great book.
I'm putting you on the spot here. Were there people who would have looked at his grid system? You're the corner forward, you stay in that corner, and at the time thought, I think it should be a bit more fluid than this.
Well, Kevin Heffernan blew it out of the way when he went rolling in the 50s. So he just went, oh yeah, no, we're not playing the game on your terms.
Okay.
Let's play it in a different terms.
Okay.
So this is it. Also, it's not how things really work.
Sure.
Like if there's a ball there and you see a chance, you're going to follow it.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to leave my grid.
Yeah, it's not. Okay. It's not as. I mean, it's broadly defined.
Okay.
But it's not
set in stone.
It's not set in stone. Although you do see the game when you see the footage now on say Gaelic footage or old movie reel footage that survives from before the 1960s and the television games. It's amazingly clear that this is not a ball carrying game. So you're not running with the ball 60 metres doing a solo run and hand passing up the field. You're letting fly with the ball and you're getting it down the field of Kings. And the fly kick, like one of the great losses to humanity is the absence of the fly kick from Gaelic football now. Just that idea that there's a ball travelling towards you and I'm just going to wind up and I'm just going to pull on it.
Sorry, they'd volley it?
Or drop, it might bounce before them or it might be coming bouncing in along the ground.
Hack it away.
Oh, let fly. And as we all know, watching someone
that's not one of the great lost arts.
It is a massive lost art because I'm not saying it's a lost art, it's a lost thing. It's been because watching it go wrong, as it always or so often can do, is
funny.
On a poor pitch, is brilliant to see.
Wow.
Especially with lads wearing big togs.
Okay, well that's very interesting then. And when did Heffernan come along with the more fluid style?
So that's into the 50s and Dublin again began to change again. But then Galway in the 50s, 60s, brilliant footballers. Just absolutely brilliant footballers.
Did they almost win Galway that name for traditional flamboyant?
Yeah, they could play everywhere and they were just so skillful and utterly dominant.
Yeah.
And I suppose it brings you through to the arrival of the Dublin-Kerry rivalry of the 70s and 80s, which has kind of been done to death.
Yeah, I think everyone's familiar with that.
Yeah.
But 40s, 50s, 60s, I was less familiar with the intricacies and the different characters.
Yeah, and it's the rise and fall of different counties. I mean, it's Cavan's last heyday. Cavan disappeared. Just gone.
Is there any trend about those counties who bubble up and then disappear? Similar themes across them all, or is it each
population based?
Oh, is
it? What is the decline of Offaly rooted around only the fact that it's a small population? It's hard to keep going. The challenge is to get there in the first place.
Yeah.
Look at Tyrone. Tyrone have their 3 All-Irelands from within a 2002 to 2008 period. They never managed it before, and they haven't managed it since. It is a huge challenge for small counties to persistently, to deliver teams at all, but certainly to repeatedly deliver them is a huge challenge. And look at the counties, like Galway come back with football teams. Galway has a city in the middle of it. Kilkenny has a large urban area for hurling. Cork has its large urban area and a huge county, populous county with huge numbers of players. Mayo is a very big county, so on.
Yeah.
But Mayo have 3 All-Irelands. Hurling's not a major presence and it's a big population.
Yeah. Of the 70s, 80s and that whole kind of rivalry, do you watch the football back often now?
I don't watch it as much as I probably watch it more than I'd be willing to let on, yeah.
Right, okay. And so it's commonly derided now, and even the players would say, I can't look back at it now. So how do you kind of put it in its place when it comes to quality?
But it depends on what you're defining it as being about. It's a different game, and games evolve. It's like if you watch soccer matches from 20 years ago, often, like games which I thought were absolutely magnificent.
No, it's amazing.
Can look pedestrian.
Yeah.
And that's what the memory does to you. The mind does strange things to you. It makes you remember. You telescope certain matches into each other as well. And you imagine that certain things, have a resonance. I was at the game in '77 that Brian McMahon spoke about.
It's the best
earlier.
game he saw.
Yeah, and it was a really, really good game. But it was also phenomenally exciting. And so do you judge a game by the fact that it finishes really tightly between two teams who are well matched? So, or are you looking for the level of skill in the game? So there is no doubt.
That's true.
There is no doubt that the skills on view change. So just as like a real good example actually in hurling is when do you see, or how often do you now see someone pulling on the ball over their head when it's dropping in hurling? So you rarely see the ball being doubled on in the air. You never see it being doubled on along the ground now, or nearly never. So games change, they evolve, different skills come to the fore. And you can see now a bit of high catching has come back into Gaelic football, not least since the change over in the mark. But everything previously was presaged over just kick the ball out into the middle of the field and let's see who can win it.
Yeah. There way you talked about Kerry in the 30s, people saying, oh my God, this will never end.
Yes.
Obviously there's echoes of that now. And I'm sure...
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Is it absurd?
It is absurd.
Right. Well, I would have said, I'm sure they said it about Kerry in the 30s. I'm sure they said it about Kerry in the 70s, 80s. But this is the first time where I feel it's actually true. And when I say it will never end, I just mean 6 to 7 All-Irelands per decade.
I doubt it.
Do you?
I think it's possible. I think given the balance of population and of resources and all of that, but it's very, very hard to win an All-Ireland football championship. It's very hard. And Dublin have won their All-Irelands with the exception of last year. I think they won last year against Tyrone, a bit of a canter. But the rest of their All-Irelands are won by a couple of points. They could easily have lost to Mayo. Easily. They could have lost to Kerry previously as well. There was only a goal in that at the end, and there was a fairly tight call in the penalty pretty late on. Now, it would have been a real travesty if Dublin hadn't won it, but it was a tight game. I think next Sunday will be a really tight game. And there are no guarantees in any of this. And these players, some of these players are done, nearly done.
Sure.
Some of their best players are done, gone. And some of their best players are almost done. And that will change things. Jim Gavin will not go on forever. And taking over from Jim Gavin will not be straightforward.
Yeah, of all of them, he's the one in particular that I would think is the irreplaceable, or the one I'd worry most about losing. Maybe Cluxton to a point.
Yeah, well, Evan Comfort's superb goalie.
That's the thing.
And he's got great keeper, but he's not Stephen Cluxton.
No, Stephen Cluxton wasn't Stephen Cluxton at Comerford's age either.
Exactly.
And I look at Paul Flynn and Bernard Brogan and all these lads who.
But the margins are so tight.
I know, and yet, for all those tight margins, Dublin had this knack of still coming out on top. That's the worry.
Okay, so here's the thing. There's a huge population in Meath now, a huge population in Kildare, a growing population in both Wicklow and Wexford. So in Leinster alone, there is no excuse for counties in Leinster not to be competitive with Dublin. No excuse. Meath and Kildare in particular are both very wealthy counties with good infrastructure.
And hasn't that been the case for the last 10 years?
Absolutely. So I don't see it as an excuse.
Yeah.
Like it's about mobilising your resources and producing quality players. Like there is no accident as to why Dublin has produced its quality players. It has, and I would completely agree that there has been a huge assistance to Dublin through the funding that it has received on its coaching programmes. Yeah. To suggest otherwise just is a denial of reality, and that is not in any way to diminish the achievement of what they've done.
Oh, sure.
It's a statement of fact.
Every time someone says that, there are at least 4 texts which pop in and say, money can't kick a ball over the bar. That's my favourite line in.
Well, yeah, that's
Can't argue with that.
Well, it is also a fact.
Yeah, it's a fact. So as we begin to kind of wrap this up, is there anything else that's kind of on your mind, All-Ireland final week?
Again, it's the notion that of how the game changes and keeps on changing, but its fundamentals of skill remain predominant. It comes down to it. The best team of players who are properly organised, properly managed, win a championship.
Yeah.
That's the same as at club level as it is in county level. And we like to think that everything changes dramatically. But it changes dramatically in almost always in how we perceive it, in how it's represented. But the actual fundamentals of the play, the capacity to skillfully move the ball with your team, to get it as quickly as you can into a scoring zone, and that you make the right decision on the ball is not new. And the success of Dublin, I think, is built on that and on a collective work rate, which underpinned by a fitness better than anyone else's. And it's no accident that you win when that's the case.
And its place in Irish life is as intact as ever, you would say?
I think it's amusing, the derision which is heaped on Gaelic football. It's actually kind of funny if you look at football
Often by
games.
football people.
Oh, themselves, and I've done it myself.
Yeah.
But it's, if you think about it, if you read what's written on American football, on the NFL, it's all about the grime and the grit and the physicality. Almost it's famed for its brutality, really. And I know there is skill in it as well.
Sure.
But the way it's written about is totally different than the way, for example, cricket is written about. This elegiac, pastoral, America's game with all its elegance and those beautiful wordsmiths who write about the game. If you go to England, and soccer is, without question, the people's game. And it is written about in no way close to the same way that cricket is written about. And the elegies to cricket and this kind of village green and this sense of Englishness and identity that is pinned around it. But soccer is way more popular than there. And if you come to here and you see celebrations of hurling, which are written in a different way, and the game's spoken about in a different way than football is.
Yeah, we had Tommy Welch on a couple of weeks ago, and he gave this kind of almost
hurling mass.
Yeah, it was like a eulogy. It was not dead though. It's not a eulogy, but it was from the pulpit. That's for sure. And that just, I don't even know who's doing the reports on Sunday. I don't know who's on. I don't know where our guy at Croke Park is just yet. I'm sure it's already been booked or whatever. But that won't happen.
It doesn't happen.
I'll say, how you doing? And he'll say, how are you? And I'm like, what are you expecting today? And we'll be off. Whereas Tommy was like, welcome to Mass, everyone. We're here. This is our day. And off he went.
Yeah. And there is a little difficulty here, because I love hurling, absolutely love hurling.
Sure,
I think it's a magnificent game.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
But there are bad hurling matches. I mean, I know to say that is deeply controversial, but
he's on his own.
Yeah. But there are bad hurling matches, and the hurling final itself, it wasn't a great game. It was fine, but it wasn't a great game.
It was ruined by a soft red, I hear.
Well, we won't have that conversation. We won't get sidelined into that. But football has a history in this country which extends back. I mean, if you look at the first poems that are written about football, are written in the 1620s. A brilliant, extensive poem celebrating a local rivalry.
Sometimes things are just so powerful that actually there's a deep confidence in, well, we can attack this all we want. In the same way that football in England is so powerful, it can be attacked all at once. It doesn't need any nurturing, is almost the feeling. Like this is too entrenched, it's too big to fail. Whereas most hurling people recognise there's something precious, they need to spread the gospel. Football's like, call us rubbish every single day of the year. Makes no odds. We're here to stay. Maybe there's something in that.
It also represents a place though, doesn't it? It's a connection to a place. So everyone talks about the GAA being a celebration of the local, and the GAA is that kind of club v club local rivalry, and it's expression of, I represent this village against your village, and away we go.
Wasn't it interesting, as a brief aside, Brian McMahon was saying more and more than ever in his life now, he's drawn to the lesser matches, the smaller matches, the purity, and just the effort is the same, and there's something kind of magical about it.
I prefer going to club matches. I prefer going to, when I go to league matches, and this is not just because of the location of my county, but I prefer to go into the lower division ones. I don't really like going to Croke Park anymore.
Really?
Yeah, you're at a remove from, and maybe it's because I don't get to see Offaly play there. anymore. But I don't feel as invested in it when you don't get to see your own county play in a place, and I think that matters. But that thing really matters, though. The GAA's success is not just a local one; it's a national one, and that national one is based around the fact that it established national competitions, and you could represent your place against some other place. So there are a whole lot of Kerry and Dublin people who are not involved in the GAA, but who will be drawn to this game on Sunday because of the blue against the green and gold.
Yeah, it's not a complicated setup to get involved in.
It's not. And there were people all over the world who will watch this because it's an All-Ireland football final, and it is a connection to something that is shared.
Yeah. So that's where we are in 2019. It's as relevant as ever. It's going to stop the country as much as ever. It's in a very healthy state.
I don't say it's in a very healthy state. I think
the game, not the GAA.
The game itself is ever changing, and it needs to keep changing. It needs to evolve, and it does have things that it needs to do. Dick Fitzgerald proposed in 1914 that the GAA should go to 13-a-side for its matches to open out the pitch even more.
Right.
I think it's still a question that exists. The field can be very crowded around the muddle now. Around the middle.
Yeah, they're fitter than ever. They can cover more
Yes,
ground.
they are.
Yeah. Interesting. And there's not much talk of that. It's happening. It's happened in rugby a good bit lately.
Yeah.
Should we go to 13 aside?
I think they will.
They may well have to. Just defensive walls running.
I think they will.
There's no room. Do you want to make a prediction as we begin to wrap this up? Or leave us with any final thoughts?
I have no idea. In the sense of, I've no idea of the future. I'm bad enough in the past, but I have no idea of the future. I find it really hard to do it. I will make a prediction, though. I on the morning of the All-Ireland hurling final of 2010, when Kilkenny were going for 5 in a row, I really fancy Tip to do it, and I packed Tip. And I didn't back them financially, but I called Tip to win it. But that was based on the fact that Tip were really, really unlucky in 2009, and that's, they were. I think they were robbed in 2009. Yeah. But if you were asked to call this game, and you ask everybody, I give Kerry a real chance. Right? Give them a real chance. I think if you've got forwards of the calibre that they have, they can win a match, and they can win any match with those forwards. But if you're asking me to come down on one side on what the more likely result is, the more likely result is that Dublin will win. And the reason why I say that is that if you ask everybody that say they have to choose, I want you to choose now, putting everything you not just have, but you will ever make on Kerry to win or Dublin to win by more than, let's say, 5. I think most people will pick Dublin to win by more than 5 than Kerry to win.
Yes.
So that suggests that the greater likelihood is a Dublin win. So for that reason, I do think Dublin will win, but I give Kerry a massive chance.
Okay, good. Because I must say I'm underwhelmed a little bit by the whole prospect on Sunday.
Are you really? Why?
I think it could be 8, 9, 10 points.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, it could very well be.
Yeah.
I mean, it could very well be. But what I'm banking on in saying this is, obviously, I think Kerry have some outstanding young footballers, and I think they have brilliant forwards, and I think that gives you a chance in every match. Number one. Number two, I think Kerry will be ferociously competitive on Sunday. That's not to suggest that Dublin won't be ferociously competitive, but I think in a ferociously competitive match, the margin's narrow. And I can't see Kerry rolling over. I think Dublin will win, but I can't see Kerry rolling over.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I think Dublin will settle better. I think Dublin will finish better, and I think for the vast majority of the middle period, they'll be on top as well. So
I think the older you get,
10-minute window.
It's a totally different scenario. But I know from playing in county finals, the older I got, the more nervous I was. Just by the time I got into my mid-30s, I was just ghost.
I think Con will be okay. I think Mannion will be okay. I think Fenton will be okay.
It's the process.
I don't think Cluxton's getting any more nervous the older he's getting, really.
See, you don't know. Nobody's done this. Nobody's done this.
Yeah, it would be a terrible thing, a really terrible thing, if the 5 in a row is done at a canter, because it just feels we've had since 1884, and it's been this mythical thing. It doesn't deserve to be.
But it hasn't been done at a canter, because the first 3 they won were really tight.
Sure. No, I accept that, but the lingering memory.
Yeah.
When I'm reeling in the ears when they show it, it will be. And Dublin did the 5 in a row. I don't want that to be a pulling up.
Well, I will say one more thing about that Dublin team. I think they're obviously a brilliant team. No doubt about it.
Absolutely.
And I know a couple of the players from around UCD.
Yeah.
And they are absolutely quality blokes.
I have to say, any of them I've met.
Absolutely quality blokes. You could not say they're anything other than that.
Yeah.
And really, really genuine.
Yeah, agreed.
And, you hear stories that are thrown out every so often about this fella and that fella. I'm kind of going, you must be joking.
Yeah, I know.
It's not tolerated. And Jim Gavin too. I know Jim Gavin gets a bit of I know he gets journalists back up to some extent because he comes out and goes, well, I don't have a problem with that.
No.
If he doesn't want to speak, he doesn't want to speak.
Journalists are not his priority.
It's not his thing.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Look, I've no problem with this team doing the 5 in a row at all.
They'll be really pleased with that, Joe.
Yeah, it'll mean a lot to them. This may give them the momentum they need.
I mean, this could be. You could be in the dressing room and Sunday lads, listen, I have no problem.
Right, we're pretty much done, are we?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thanks so much. That was an hour, so kind of zip by very quickly. Paul Rouse, Professor of History at UCD, author of several books, including Sport in Ireland, the History,